I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Molly Marty is the founding CEO of the National Resilience Institute. As a social psychologist, attorney, and resilience researcher, she trains and consults internationally in the fields of education, military, crisis response, and work-life resilience. Dr. Marty's Resiliency Matters TV show provides resilience education directly to more than 250,000 households, and her books on psychology and leadership have been translated into 8 languages. Her personal place of thriving is an apple orchard in the scenic Northeast Iowa. And a little personal factoid, when she was growing up, her mother used to tell her that she could be anything that she wanted to be, and Dr. Molly Marty said that she wanted to be a bear. So her family, from time to time, will call her Bear. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Molly Marty.
You've been talking to my sister. Thank you. A family story. My sister's here, and that's the danger of traveling with family. Get some of the dirt. But yes, I was very disappointed when I had a fight with my brother because my mom insisted I could be who and what I wanted to be. She raised 6 very strong women, and my brother Steve said, "No, you can't be a bear, you're a human." And I said, "Mom said I can be." And the look on her face, I recognized that as a mother. The first time I disappointed my child, she meant anything as a human. So she was a great inspiration. Appropriately, I'm starting out with a photo of my mom. There was one story that my mom couldn't tell without tears in her eyes until the day she died. And that was about her brother, Tom. They were best buddies, close in age, and when my mom was 20 years old, Tom went off to war to join their older brother, Jim, who already was serving. And my dad was also serving at that time. My mom didn't know that yet, but she would go on and marry him, and they would have 13 children, so it's probably good she didn't know that at that time. I'm number 12. One day, my mom was sitting on the steps at Grandma's house, and she says, according to her, how she would tell this story, "I felt Tom come and sit down next to me. And he said, 'Kate, I'm okay. It's all okay. Tell Mother I'm okay.'" And so my mom went to my grandma and told her what happened and said, "Mom, I think Tom died." The MIA showed up that next week, followed by a confirmation of death. I think you already know, based on the initial speakers, you're going to hear a lot of amazing stories today. Military is one place I have yet to meet anyone who is serving, anyone who so passionately supports those of you who serve, who doesn't have that pivotal life-defining story that explains a lot about why they are doing what they're doing. Today you will hear stories of heroism. You will hear stories of loss. You will hear stories of resilience and of hope and of strength. And you'll also hear research, but I really believe it's through our stories, and the research shows it's through our stories that we can make meaning, and we can process trauma, and we can create new narratives of hope and healing and connection. And we can come together and tell stories together and really ask about what kind of world we want to live in, and what kind of world do we want to create and hand off to our children and future generations. This is part of my research story. At the time I found my way to this work, I wasn't looking for it. I had spent about a decade working in competitive environments. Started with D1 athletes, worked up to world and Olympic athletes, expanded to corporate athletes, and that was my world of researching and coaching and writing. When my community, this top photo here, Looks like Mayberry, USA, town of 4,000 in Iowa. It's won awards for the most beautiful town in America. The day started, what I most recall initially is I received a text from my 16-year-old son. And he said, "Mom, we're having a drill at school. It's just a drill. I'm fine. I love you." I was having coffee with a colleague, and that came up. And we are a loving family. But when your 16-year-old kid texts you in the middle of the day and says, "I love you," the hair on your arm goes up. And so I quickly logged on to my email to see if there was something going on at school. And by then, a church line from this town was reporting there was an active shooter in the school, calling on people to pray for the shooter, pray for the kids. So I started to hightail it, to be met by police tape, and there was a helicopter. It wasn't an active shooter. There was misinformation. There was a teenager who had attempted to take his life in school, and they couldn't tell yet if that was self-harm or being perpetrated on him. He was life-flighted out and died a few days later. And within 6 months, we had lost 2 other teens to suicide, and we had a lot more kids going to the hospital. The last 2 boys were just a couple weeks apart, and yet again, I got a phone call early morning. I was in a position to have to tell my children, and my son said, "No, Mom, that's not possible." They were running cross country and track together, and he said, he just borrowed something from me, and he gave it back to me yesterday, and he just had such a hard time processing that, and it was one of those moments that laid itself on my heart, and I thought, what kind of world can we live in where this is okay, and this is becoming commonplace? Our kids are taking their lives, and it's not okay, and it's not okay that our military are taking lives at the rate that's happening. And that's why we know we're all coming together today to have this conversation and to share information. And so at that time I was teaching as an adjunct at the University of Iowa in the Department of Psych. I stepped away from that, but I knew from my time as an educator, I needed to learn and I needed to teach. I knew I had a lot to learn because I had been focusing on performance in competitive environments, and I was being basically asked to become a traumatologist and then to integrate those 2 worlds. And so we looked around the world. We started what was called a community resiliency project, and I thought, where can we go to learn the best information the most quickly? And we settled on the Israel Trauma Coalition, a non-political, nonpartisan group that has been working in the area of trauma and resilience for years in Israel. So we took a team of 3 over, did an immersion training, and learned a tremendous amount. This bottom picture is a school in Israel and throughout in the south and in the whole of Israel. You'll hear from Maya in details about her work in Israel and the great work of Natal today. But the whole country's mapped out in code red and how long you have to get under the shelter to avoid incoming or shrapnel. And in the south, you have 15 seconds. And we heard heart-wrenching stories of, for example, a mother who had 3 children, and she grabbed the 2 youngest thinking her 4-year-old is old enough and would safely make way to shelter, and she was wrong and lost the child. And it was here where I just had this epiphany that they do such a good job of understanding where they need to be and when in order to survive, and that's not resilience, that's survival. And yet even within those type of demands that they live with daily, there's still opportunities, and they were being very innovative in finding ways toward those opportunities to create connection and meaning and purpose and joy. And I thought, that's resilience. And these 2 things exist together. But it was a pivotal moment in my personal story of resilience. So one thing I've always done, I've been a very applied psychologist before I was a psychologist. The legal training probably has a lot to do with this, but I'm very applied, and I like to do my deep dives into research. I do get my geek on with that, and then I try to create useful information about what I've learned in the research. So we created several models, and this Thrive model is one that has had wide application, starting in education, but then into other fields. I'm not going to go into detail on the Thrive model, but it is on the NRI website, and it will walk you through these 6 capacity builders. The research shows that the number 1 factor that we need to stabilize our lives and to grow strength and resilience is trusted relationships. And then high expectations. It's not about requiring more and more, but it's about requiring as high a level for each individual and then providing that appropriate support, but really taking into account their psychological and physical readiness and continuing to help them grow. Resilient skills we're going to talk about throughout the day, but I'll give more time to that as well. Involvement, we are designed to make meaningful contributions we find meaningful to each other, to our tribe, to our communities. Vision, hope is something that sounds soft, and there's a science of hope. And hope is life strengthening and life saving. And often we need someone else to hold hope for us when we can't grasp it. And so we serve that purpose for each other. And then really co-creating a positive future for ourselves and for each other. And enrichment, none of what we're talking about today is a one and done. It's an ongoing process of how do we really mobilize communities to provide whole community, whole person supports that nourish us, mind, body, and emotions and spirit. So what I'm going to do today is kind of go under the Thrive model and bring up a few, 3 core principles that underline the research, the science of resilience. And the first truth is that all behavior is expressing a need. All behavior is expressing a need. And we can get so caught up in that behavior is driving me crazy, or why are you doing that? And when we start to shift to truly understand that we all have these core human needs and we're trying to get them met the best way in that moment we know how. So what are the core needs? The research shows that we need a sense of safety, both physically and emotionally, psychologically. We need a sense of belonging. We need connection. We need to feel that we are seen and heard and valued. We have a need of purpose, to have meaning in our life, to know that we're making a difference for someone else. The research actually shows that if you know when you wake up in the morning, when your feet hit the ground and you know why you're getting up and who you're going to go help, you have that purpose, on average you live 7 years longer than if you wake up and it's just another day. So purpose is a very powerful factor in our lives. That's Dan Buettner's research. And we need a sense of competence. We are more resilient when the world recognizes that we're good at something. Within the sense of competence, we also have to have a sense of control over an important aspect of our life. And we have to feel that we have the resources and can use those resources to meet our goals, to get what we want. So these are our 4 core human needs. You can be the Pope, you can be the president, we all have these needs. And I think it can be really helpful to say, okay, what happens in the absence of these needs? In the absence of these needs, we get to this bottom statement. We feel threatened, we feel isolated, we feel useless, and we feel powerless. And when that happens, it will erode our sense of well-being, it will erode our resilience. We can't really talk about human needs, especially in your context, without acknowledging the impact of trauma. Trauma impacts how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we see the world. One of the best resources that we share out is a book, if you're a reader, by David Morris. He was a journalist. He served in combat. He wasn't wounded. He came back. He went back as a journalist, and he was wounded in the war, and he wrote a very readable, digestible, and personal take on post-traumatic stress. And he's saying that the first duty is simply to acknowledge trauma. We're humans, we are fragile in so many ways, and it's called post-traumatic stress because it indicates there was something before. It was a normal day, it was a living life, and there's this splinter, this moment in time, and the post looks very different than that. And we are then in a position where we have to start to make meaning of that. And so that's a good resource if you're interested in diving a little deeper. It's hard to see this photo, but it was from when I was in Canada. And when you talk about the impacts of trauma, it's really a story of what's going on in your brain and those neural pathways. So I was in Canada speaking this spring, and at the last night they sent us to an aquarium, the speakers and some guests. And that night I met a man who had served 30 years in the LAPD. I had spoken at a conference for counterterrorism and resilience with our law enforcement and intelligence agents. And so I met this man, 30 years in LAPD. I was also visiting with a woman I had talked to at the conference who very openly was a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. And what she found, she was a stoic, Jeff, what she found most helpful is that she would just see things not good, not bad, it just is. And I give meaning to that. You know, you walk outside, it's raining. It's not, oh, it's raining. I decide, it's just raining. What meaning? What attitude will I bring to that? And then we're walking out, these were beautiful creatures swimming over our head, green sawtooth fish, and I snapped some photos and a video because I have a friend who has a few littles, and I thought, oh, these kids are gonna really love. It's just a magical creature. And so I take this photo and I get home to send the video, and the audio starts to play. And it's only 6 or 7 seconds. I'm not gonna play it today. It's on YouTube. But in 6 or 7 seconds, I listen to the audio and I think this is the world's shortest experiment on the impacts of neural pathways and how the more we think something and you repeat it again and again, you basically are creating initially country roads in your mind, and then you know it can go to super highways. But we get to do that work on those pathways. So we're looking at the very same fish, and the cop says, he's frowning, right? And right on top of that, the middle person said, well, I don't know if he's frowning, he's just looking at us. And on top of her, I said, he's so happy. And then I hear her go, I don't know if he's happy, he's just looking at us. So 3 people experiencing the very same situation with 3 very different takes based on how their brain functions. And so that's an example of the work we do and why we need to understand the impacts of trauma. One of the most helpful, I think, concepts, something you can take with you today, is you can first go around and say, okay, that's either, you know, that's trauma, or that's an expression of need, and bring a curiosity to it, an open-minded curiosity, and not, again, focus on what's wrong with you, or why do you keep doing that, but what happened to you? What's your story? And have that curiosity, and have those conversations, and start with what do you need? And sometimes we don't even know. You'll get, I don't know. I don't even know what I need. And so then that next question can be, what can I do right now in this moment to improve this relationship? What can I do right now in this moment to help this person move forward? But it can really shift your interactions with people when you come from this place of that curiosity of what's the story, the real full story. The second core understanding that I want to communicate today is the first pulse to check is your own. Right. Yes, we want to help other people. Yes, we want to help them calm down. And when we have behaviors, often we think behavioral issues, these are issues of regulation. Right? They're dysregulated. Their stress response system has kicked in, and a lot of stuff just follows from that. You've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're regulated, we're calm, we're centered. We have mirror neurons, and the more calm you can be and the more centered you can be, the better everybody around you is going to be. What creates resilient teams? It's calm leaders, it's nourished leaders. Right? That self-care is an important piece, because the truth is that you cannot give away what you do not have. And that's why you need to build your strength and capacity, and you cannot lead someone else past your own point of healing. You can't lead someone else past your own point of leadership. When we teach resilience, we call this the Thrive 5. So in the Thrive model, THR, we get to the resilience piece. This is our structure within that. We start with self-care. Oftentimes it's either a PS or not mentioned at all, but we start in building self-capacity. We do a lot on increasing self-awareness and increasing our vocabulary of even knowing what's going on within us. And then self-regulation. How do we keep ourselves within our, what's called a window of tolerance, and how to expand that window of tolerance. Absolutely, coping skills are important. Social and relational skills are important, and we teach them, but we can't start there. We have to start with getting ourselves regulated and know what's going on within us and building our own capacity. I like to say, what if your key job was really keeping your heart rate at 60 beats per minute? And there are variations. My husband's a marathoner, has been for years and years, and so he's pretty proud of his resting heart rate of 49 or 48 or 47. It just, but he's proud of it. There's variations here. But a rule of thumb, what can you do to keep your heart rate and get your heart rate back down to 60 beats per minute? And when you're in some situations, as the general talked about this morning, your heart rate's not going to be at 60 beats per minute. Right? How do you get back to center and keep the focus on that? And this is true both within the daily stresses and interactions and in high stress situations. And then redefining the basics. We know that basic self-care includes physical. We need our sleep, we need hydration, we need healthy food, we need to move our bodies. But we also go back to those needs. We need connection, we need a sense of belonging, we need some playtime, we need that purpose that comes through the work. And so much of this is built in within your service, and so then this is where the issues with transitions and veterans and what we're going to be talking about this afternoon comes into play. And then the third core understanding is resilience is more about being resourced than being resourceful. I really want to repeat that. Resilience is more about being resourced than being resourceful. I'm guilty of this. I want to believe that resilience, and I did for years working with competitives, and I still work with competitives, and not like that all goes away when you truly understand the science of resilience. But we want to believe, because it makes for a better story, that resilience is about valor, or it's about grit, or it's about talent, or it's about being the exceptional. When the research shows that it's more about being supported and resourced. And all those internal factors that are so important, they're going to be elevated when we have that support. There's a quote here from Dr. Michael Unger. He said, "Rugged individuals make great television. Resourced individuals make great science." This is what the science shows. And I was slow to this party, but I am a scientist, and it is there. Personal strengths and coping skills matter, absolutely, but our relationships and our resources matter even more. So we know that your well-being is largely dependent on the people around you. A great quote by Brene Brown. Her grandmother told her this when she was a little girl, and I'm so glad she shared it forward. Her grandmother said, "We don't have to do it all alone. We were never meant to." That's a nice thing to hang where you can see it from time to time. So it's about our relationships, and it's about being well-resourced, and then tailoring resources to individuals and to culture. Because if it's not relevant to them, you're not going to seek them out, and you're not going to use them. The other day, I was at the bank coming here to, I was transferring some money internationally, which just can take a long time. And so I was visiting with this personal banker. I'd never met him before. And he started, conversing. I told him what we were doing here. He said he had spent 6 years in the Guard, Army, National Guard. And he said, wow, that resilience stuff, they would talk about it, and it just kind of seemed like they'd say the same thing a lot, so I tuned it out a bit. But now looking back, I wish I had gone to more education. Yes, but there's one thing that I did learn, and I remember it to this day. And he gave the phrase, and I think most of you are familiar, I know the MTRs teach this, but hunt for the good stuff, right? So there's a science behind what we can do to fight the negativity bias, because our brains look for the negative, because when we were evolving, it was much better to be finding the saber-toothed tiger in the bushes than be looking at the beautiful sunset. And so we glom onto the negative, and the positive bounces off us. And so we need to have practices. And so they tailored this to the military so that that would make more sense to you. And 6 years later, he said, I still remember that. I still use it. And so all of the training you do, you have to make sure that it's landing, that it's relevant, and you need to have conversations about that. Because if people are tuning it out, it's not going to be much help. And then the final point on grit I want to make is that post-traumatic growth that we talk about. We define resilience as the capacity to prepare for, adapt to, and grow through adversity. And so it goes all the way from preparedness to coping and adapting to that potential for post-traumatic growth. That is not a spectrum where we have post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth. Those are not opposite ends. They can coexist together. We have a growing research to show they do coexist together, that you can be dealing with trauma and recovery, and at the same time, you can be meeting those core needs, and you can be finding purpose and meaning in that, and you can use those experiences as a catalyst for growth and a catalyst to help others. Some great stories coming from Jeff this morning. And so those, I want to make sure that you're not telling yourself that those are opposite ends of the spectrum. I also want to give a caveat, a challenge that is so important to be walking the talk with resilience. I'm sure you probably can't see this in the back, but it's a supervisor, and he's saying, okay, criticize the behavior, not the person. Criticize the behavior, not the person. All right, he knows what he needs to do. And he goes in and he said, the email you sent to everyone looks as if it had been written by a monkey on crack. Just to be clear, you are terrific, but everything you do is exactly what a moron would do. Okay? So we can say what we need to say, and we can talk the party line, but we need to be walking it out. And I don't know if there's any more area of human functioning than human resilience that this matters. Well, parenting, maybe, but human resilience. We have to be really shifting and really looking at what are our core beliefs. And so we do a lot of that self-awareness work. Because when we're kids and we're growing up, we're on input mode, and a lot of stuff gets put into our brains, and a lot of that we don't even know is there, and it is driving what we do every day in relationship with ourselves and with each other. And then this, it's kind of been referenced, but we all are going to have those times in our life where we are welcome to a club we didn't ask for, we didn't want, we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy. For some of those, I thought when I turned 50, that was being welcome to the club, right? But when I would turn 51, we had some bad genetics. We had some brilliance in our family and a lot of heart, but we have genetics that increase risk of colon cancer, brain cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer. And we've had some survivors, and we've had some that we've lost way too early. So my 17-year-old brother was a brain cancer survivor, and he went on to be a doctor because he wanted to help others. And our 3-year-old niece didn't survive brain cancer. Lost my mom early, but when I was 51, just as my sister had been 51, and I was actually helping support her 34-year-old daughter, we all had breast cancer. And so I was big at CrossFit and doing the MRF, and I couldn't obviously do the MRF. This was 18 months ago. I went through surgery. And so these are my 5 sisters on one side. And when I couldn't do the MRF, we did a breast cancer awareness walk. And with 2 of us being survivors and all of us being advocates, those were my people. Those are my resources. And then this year, I was able to do the MRF. And I didn't set any records, but I was there. And then this is a member of the gym who came back after she finished, and she ran me back in that last mile. And in my CrossFit gym, my coaches were the first people who showed up at my house. My sister was there, actually, to help with the drains and take care, right? I could say I'm a cancer survivor because I'm oh so tough, or I had the mindset, but I know it's not true from the science, and I know it's not true from my life. When we're really being real, we know it's about relationships, and we know it's about resources. And I had them so plentiful. And to that, I'm grateful that this is how we get through those experiences when we're welcome to the club and we don't want to be there. The only way the only way forward is through in a lot of the experiences in life. And we get through that together. So what story are you writing? And I am just so honored to play and work with the people that are here today, and to Wounded Warrior Project for their support. And Andrew's base has been just extraordinary. Your team here has been extraordinary in planning this event and taking very good care of us. So I want to thank you for that. But together we stand and we ask that question also, not only our personal story, but what story are we writing for our world? And we are dedicated to working together to say our story, what we know to be true and what we will fight for every day, is to create this world that acknowledges and honors that we all have a right to thrive. There are some resources. You can find us at nationalresilienceinstitute.org. My personal email is here, Molly, at nationalresilienceinstitute.org. We're here to help. Thank you.